Planning Commission meeting. To kick us off, we'll start with a acknowledgement. So I'd like to, on behalf of the Seattle Planning Commission, to humbly recognize that we are gathered on Indigenous land, the traditional, ancestral, and unceded territories of the Coast Salish people. We'd like to thank the caretakers of this land who've lived and continue to live here since time immemorial, and acknowledge the role that traditional Western-centric planning practices have played in farming, displacing, and attempting to erase Native communities. And we respect Indigenous rights to sovereignty and self-determination. We commit to being better listeners, learners, and to lifting Indigenous voices. We also commit to identifying racist practices, to practicing allyship, striving to center restorative land stewardship rather than unsustainable and extractive use of the land. With that, just an announcement for members of the public or any visitors. Welcome. We are happy to make all commission meetings open to the public. Please note that the Planning Commission does not hold public hearings since the commission is an advisory body. We provide recommendations to elected leaders that in turn make the actual decisions. So we encourage you, individuals and organizations, to provide their comments appropriately directly to elected officials. This meeting is hybrid, with some individuals participating remotely on Microsoft Teams, while the rest of us are here in the person in the Boards and Commissions room in Seattle City Hall on L2. This is our agenda for today, just so you all can see. And then for our color, we can pull up our color grade space one, please. I'd like to ask if there'd be any commissioners who'd be willing to pick one of these for us to hold with us as we go through our agenda today. Last opportunity to do so, Lauren.
I've just been keeping focused on our collective goals. You know, one of the things I really appreciate about being on the commission is that I've just gotten this image of a kind of a rudder on a boat, you know, with political changes, just the waves that kind of come and go, that the commission to me has always been a place where we can center racial equity and our collective liberation, and how the way we use land, the way we relate to land, and how we move can be generative and can be restorative, and that I think that's one of the strengths of centering our collective goal.
Thank you, Lauren. And I'll pick one too, since it's both of our last commission meetings. So I'll pick one too. Back you up, Lauren. Practice examining racially biased systems. The part that stood out to me is the bottom of systems are what's left after all the people have moved. And Lauren and I have been on the commission for quite a number of years now, and seen many different people through this room, but also have seen, you know, the commission kind of stay true to the values and the vision of having an equitable and just and sustainable city. And so I hope that that's what continues on with you all leading the way. So, all right. With that, we agree to these norms. Yes. Yes. Great. On the agenda today, we have two major items. One, a briefing from city staff on the revised One Seattle plan, and on the permanent legislation to implement House Bill 1110. Both pieces of legislation are currently being considered by the city council. We also have to approve our minutes from the May 8th meeting. Can I ask for a motion to approve minutes? A motion. Thank you, Rose. A second?
A second.
Thank you, Matt. Matt M. Any changes or amendments to the May 8th meeting minutes? All right, enough of an awkward pause. Great. All those in favor of approval, say aye.
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 Aye. Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstentions? All right, thank you all for that. Upcoming meetings, next Thursday's Land Use and Transportation Committee meeting is rescheduled to Tuesday, June 24th, due to the Juneteenth holiday that is coming up next week. And then our next full commission meeting is scheduled for June 26th from 7:30 to 9 a.m. And that will be a hybrid meeting as well, with some folks participating remotely and some on the and then I'll pass to Vanessa for announcements.
Thanks, Jamie. So we are in a truly hybrid meeting format today with half of the commission here in the boards and commissions room and the other commission members participating by MS Teams. So I would like to encourage you all to use the chat function of MS Teams to be recognized to speak. For those in the room who may not have a computer, I think almost everybody does, but if you're having connectivity issues and you want to be recognized to speak, please just take your name plate and flip it up. And Jamie and I will do our best to make sure that everyone has the opportunity to ask a question or make a comment once we get to that portion of the meeting. I'm going to turn it over to Jamie to start introductions. And then I'll say a few things about public comment, although I have not received any public comment. And I don't see anybody in the room, and I don't believe we have any members of the public. So over to you, Jamie.
Pretty gross. So if we could go around the room, please, and introduce yourself, name, pronouns, what neighborhood you live in, and then if you want to say anything about your type of work you do, you can do that as well. So I'll start. I'm Jamie Strobel. I use she, her pronouns. I live in the future 130th station area that is currently being built. It's so close. I'm so excited. And as soon as they make it safe for me to cross to walk there safely, I'll be so stoked. There is a new bike lane. And then I work in climate change and environmental justice. And so I will pass to my coach, other coach, Michaela. Good afternoon, Michaela Dapper, she, her pronouns. I live in Capitol Hill and I work in affordable housing planning.
I'll go next. Matt Malloy, he, him pronouns. I live in Green Lake and I work at a restaurant and a substitute teacher.
I'm Rose Luchello-Woodson, pronouns they, them. I live up north in Lincoln Springs / Northgate in the weird transition zone. And for my day job, I'm a wetland biologist and environmental permitting specialist for Jacobs. And I'll pass to, should we stay in the room or jump virtual? Okay, Caleb.
Everyone, my name is Caleb Tolde, he, him pronouns. I live in Beacon Hill and I work in education. And I'll pass it to Cecilia.
Hi, Cecilia, she, her pronouns. I live next to the Roosevelt Light Rail Station, and I am a community organizer and work with people with disabilities on housing and transportation. And I will pass it to Matt Hutchins.
Hey everyone, this is Matt Hutchins. I use he, him pronouns. I live in West Seattle, and I am an architect, and I specialize in housing of all shapes and sizes. I don't know if there are any other commissioners, otherwise staff.
Yeah, go ahead.
Oh wait, I see Nick maybe.
Yeah, we've got a couple others. Go ahead, Gio.
Okay, it's hard for me to know who's in the room or not.
It's okay.
For sure. Zio Alvarez, she, they pronouns. I live in White Center, Highland Park, and I work as a designer for an architecture firm downtown. That's the one.
Yeah, hi, I'm Lauren Squires, she, her. I live at the Mount Baker Light Rail Station, and I work for King County Metro, and I lead the Connecting to Transit program. Nick.
Hey everyone, Nick Whipple, I use he, him pronouns. I live in West Seattle in the North Del Ridge neighborhood. And for my day job, I am a city planner on the east side. there anyone
Let's go.
else?
Let's go to Monica and then Dylan.
Hey everyone, my name is Monica Sharma. My day job is I work in advocacy and organizing around access to youth play and physical activity. I live in the Central District. Also, just a heads up, my computer's acting a little funky, so forgive me if I'm spotty. And then I believe Dylan was next.
Hello, everyone.
Yes.
Sorry. Hi, everyone. My name is Dylan Stevenson, he, they pronouns. I live in the Belltown neighborhood, and I teach urban planning at the University of Washington. And graduation is tomorrow, so things are quite hectic here at work.
How about, we'll move on to staff. How about Robin?
Hi, Robin McGonigal. I live on Vashon Island. I use she, they pronouns, and I am staff.
I'll jump in. Hi, everyone. Olivia Baker, she, her pronouns, staff to the special.
I'll go. I'm John Hoy, staff to the Planning Commission, AZ and pronouns. Yes, sir.
Thanks everyone for being here. My name is Vanessa Murdoch. I use she, her pronouns. I'm also staff to the commission. And I am going to read a little bit about our public comment. I do note there are a few people, members of the public who are joining us. So we provide a couple of different options for providing comments, public comment at our meetings. We welcome public comment. You may do so by coming to the boards and commissions room here in City Hall. You may do so by emailing your comment to me in advance of the meeting. My email address is vanessa.murdoch, that's with CK, at seattle.gov. Or if you're on the call and you would like to be recognized to provide public comment, please either raise your hand or put your name in the chat, or email me if you are calling in, and we'd be happy to take your public comment. And I will just give it a few seconds in case any of our members of the public joining us do care to provide public comment. Okay, I am not seeing any email and I'm not seeing anything in the Teams platform that indicates anybody would like to provide public comment. So I am going to move us on to commission business. I am going to note that we are running a couple minutes late. Thank you, Michael, for your patience. So we're going to take about 5 minutes to finish up our commission business. Want to remind commissioners to email me your nominations for commission for commission leadership. That would be the co-chairs of the commission, as well as the co-chairs of the Land Use and Transportation Committee and the co-chairs of the Housing and Neighborhoods Committee. If you have questions about the nomination process, please feel free to contact me, and I'm asking for nominations to come to me by next Thursday, June 19th. The commission will take a vote on a leadership slate at the following full commission meeting, which is Thursday, the 26th of June. Also wanted to share with you that we have 2 recommended appointments that are city council appointments proceeding to the Land Use Committee of the Seattle City Council next Wednesday. We're very excited to be hopefully welcoming Rebecca Brune, who is transit-oriented development project manager at Sound Transit, as well as Julia Janin Shields, who is a regional planning, equity, and engagement program manager at King County. Just a reminder that all appointments are subject to full city council approval. They will be introduced at the Land Use Committee next Wednesday, and then approved, hopefully, at the following full council meeting on Tuesday the following week. And with that, given the fact that we are bringing on these 2 great individuals, that sadly means that we are saying goodbye to 2 fantastic individuals. And I'm just going to say a few things about Jamie Strobel and Lauren Squires. And I've written down some notes because I'm sure I'm going to forget something despite my notes. I'd like to note that both are the only current commissioners who served the commission in a pre-hybrid format. So this used to be our norm. And so all other commissioners who are on the call and who are participating here in the meeting, all that you know is the hybrid format, whereas Jamie and Lauren are old school and remember coming to this room several times a month. Also wanted to note that both Jamie and Lauren volunteer and contribute their time, energy, and passion well beyond that to the Planning Commission. And as I was thinking about what to say about them both today, I was reminded of the saying, if you want something done, ask a busy person. So both Jamie and Lauren, as I said, volunteer well and beyond the Planning Commission and have thoroughly committed their time and energy and passion and strengths to this body, for which we are thankful, as well as all Seattleites. Jamie was appointed in April of 2016. She has consistently elevated the perspective of those often left out of the typical planning conversation, including youth, BIPOC, and renters, as well as issues that were often left out of the planning conversation, at least before Jamie joined the convo. Environmental justice for all, unintended harmful consequences of decisions, public health considerations, and many other things. Jamie is a deft and thoughtful facilitator. She always makes sure everybody has a chance to speak and calls on people to provide them that opportunity. Jamie participated in the last comp plan update and lived to tell the tale. So that's, encouragement for all the rest of you. She's on her second round here. She was also very involved in the Planning Commission's support of the mandatory housing affordability program and bravely represented the Planning Commission and also the renter community on a tension-filled panel discussion at City Hall less than 3 years after being appointed to the commission. She has worked on the scene and behind the scenes, helping with the Planning Commission appointment process, I believe almost every year that she served. She served as co-chair during a very tumultuous time for us all, navigating the pandemic and the post-pandemic and what that looked like, as I noted before, moving into a hybrid situation. And she has represented the Planning Commission formally and informally during her tenure. Lauren joined the Planning Commission as a Get Engaged member in September of 2014. Then was appointed to the Planning Commission in April of 2016, along with Jamie, Eileen Canola, and Julio Sanchez. When first appointed, I thought of Lauren as a mini Amalia Layton, who Lauren worked with, and Amalia was a planning commissioner who also started as a Get Engaged member. I quickly shed that association as Lauren carved her own and distinctive profile. So not at all a mini anything. I think of Lauren as a steadfast planner who really brings all the great stuff that a planner can bring, multifaceted, multidisciplinary, really making the connections across a variety of different disciplines, including land use, transportation, housing, environmental justice. She puts racial and social equity at the core of her work and her involvement. She's a great synthesizer and has been very helpful in helping craft the commission's comments. She also survived the last comp plan update, so we have 2 survivors here. And so there is proof that there is life after a comp plan update. I'm sure there are many things that I'm forgetting. If I talk too long, I'll start to choke up. So I'm going to ask if anybody else has something to add, comments, reflections. Don't feel like you're put on the spot. There will be opportunities to do so in a less formal setting at another time.
So I'd just like to say a few words as the co-chair. I feel I sit in a special position to be able to embarrass both Jamie and Lauren a little bit. Jamie and I go way back. We actually worked together at Capitol Hill Housing, back in the day, on your interview panel. And we sat next to each other at the office. And I remember when you said you were so excited about joining the planning commission. And I remember you telling me with genuine passion that you wanted to shape the comprehensive plan. And somehow you have managed to serve on this commission without seeing one adopted in your time on the commission, which might be your secret power, I don't know. If you don't want a comprehensive plan to get adopted, according to the commission, apparently.
Or Lord.
Is the same true for you, Lauren? Did you join that?
We're on the.
2035 was adopted.
Yeah, 2035.
Well, you were there for that. I was not. It was adopted right in between what you were.
And so you are part of the reason why you're on the commission. I've looked at the work that you were doing and the impact that you're having out in the community. And so I feel like I am building off of the strong foundation for. And Lauren, you were a consummate connector. You made a special point to reach out to everybody on the commission, including me, to get to know me. That is a large piece of how you get things done in the city is through relationships that are meaningful. And so thank you for being a friend. And I love the Vanessa said synthesizer because I was going to call you the great synthesizer. You do a wonderful job of wrapping things up and bringing kind of a vision. We did an articulate vision, whatever it's that we're about. I'm going to miss both of you a lot, but you know where to find us. Hopefully, we can count on you for showing public comment. Thank you.
Absolutely. Round of applause. And that concludes our business. So I will turn it back to Jamie to take us into the next.
Well, now we have Michael Hunter here in person. Is Brennan Seeley on the call?
He'll be joining us.
Oh, he's joining us as well. Okay. So Michael Hubner's here to talk about the revised One Seattle plan and permanent legislation to implement House Bill 1110. We'll provide an overview of the changes made to the One Seattle plan since it was first transmitted in March, as well as providing an overview of the proposed permanent legislation to implement HB 1110. Both pieces of legislation are currently under consideration by the City Council. And I suggest we start with the One Seattle plan, entertain questions, and then do a little discussion on that topic before we move on to the HB 1110 portion. We have 2 hours total for this. So we'll plan about an hour for each topic. We're actually a little bit under 2 hours now. We're at like an hour and 50 minutes.
Great. That means I can talk for 2 hours? No, just kidding. I'm a little giddy because we're all here in, well, not everybody, but so many people are here in person. This is by far, I had one other meeting in this Boards and Commissions room, which is not a planning commission meeting. But this is by far, they had a lot of people, and that was thrilling. And now to see all of you, the first time I've seen such a large group of commissioners in one place at one time, not online. Congratulations for getting it this far. This life after, I've learned 2 things. There's life so far in this meeting, this life after a pandemic and this life after a comprehensive plan gets adopted or whatever we end up, whatever we do with comprehensive plans. This one will be adopted. We'll talk about the schedule, what to expect. Very optimistic about the schedule going forward. Thank you for having me. Just for the record, Michael Hubner, I'm the long-range planning manager in OPCD and the project manager for the One Seattle Plan Comprehensive Plan update. Let me make sure that I have a set of slides. Let me share my screen. Actually, let me also turn on my camera would probably be helpful. There we go. And I'm going to share, what I'm going to do is I'm going to use the slide deck that we used for select committee on the comprehensive plan at their most recent meeting. But I'm not going to go through all of the slides in that deck. We're going to go through it pretty quickly this afternoon, and I'm just going to highlight just big picture points that I think are probably most relevant to your consideration, and then we'll pause and go in a little bit more detail around the changes to the growth strategy map primarily, and then also I will go into a little bit more in depth on the calendar going forward. I understand those are probably things that you're going to be interested in hearing about. Okay, let's see. That worked. Oops. There we go. Excellent. Okay, so computer, advance my slides. Bear with me for a second here. Okay, not working. Try it again. Oh, there we go. Excellent. Okay. So we were back with council, and as I suspect most of you, all of you are aware that we originally brought the mayor's recommended One Seattle plan to council at the beginning of January. It was released to the public. We were working with council staff to finalize the actual legislation at that time, and we started a process. We had, I think 3 meetings with the select committee. It's a committee of the whole of the council in January. We had a couple in February, and then we had we had several appeals of the final EIS in February going into March. Given the delay that was necessitated because under city code, the council does not actively consider or take action on legislation that is under appeal under CEPA. That paused that process on the main legislation. They spent the next 2 months working on interim legislation to implement House Bill 1110. And now they're just returning to the comprehensive plan legislation and permanent legislation on 1110, which of course we're going to talk about today. That was very unfortunate to lose the momentum and time, but coming back to the select committee at their meeting, now that they're pivoting back to the main legislation, our job is to provide to remind them what we had covered before, press the reset button a little bit just to get back oriented to the main task at hand. So that's what these slides are. We talked about what a comprehensive plan is, talked about some of the main requirements that the comprehensive plan responds to. And I know the commission has been very, obviously this is a starting point for a lot of your thinking, which is, why do we do a comp plan? What does it have to do under state law? And highlighted especially all of the new things that are in state law around climate and especially housing, the middle housing bill, but also House Bill 1220. Our PSRC regional expectations and process, and the Growth Management Planning Council, which adopts the CPPs. We highlighted really big pieces of the process. The public engagement, which we had an entire presentation on public engagement back in January or February, I can't remember which one, but we spent a lot of time with the council talking about what we had done through essentially 4 big phases of engagement and some of the new tools that we had used, the equity focus of our work, what we heard from the public. We also touched on the EIS, reminded them of that process, the interdepartmental collaboration, racial equity toolkit, the overall timeline for the comp plan. Yes, there's life after a comp plan is adopted. There's also a lot of life to live while you're updating a comprehensive plan. This is 4 years in the making. And we're now at the very right-hand side of this simplified chart of our timeline in the council legislative process in 2025. We provided an overview of the plan document. Thank you to the commission for I know that the draft plan was reviewed by the commission, and I suspect that some of you, focused on some parts of the plan and versus other parts of the plan, and we really wanting to convey to the council in their consideration of the legislation now. Well, what did we do to the comprehensive plan to update? What is an update in terms of the document itself, and highlighted for them, and I would for you as well, is there's a lot of updated narrative and policy language. We operate in a very interdepartmental, collegial way with our peers across the city to ensure consistency with what all the departments are doing or thinking of doing in the next 10, 20 years, reorganization of the plan. And one thing I knew that you, and I apologize for it wasn't quite ready at the time that you, the commission, were reviewing the plan, is we have a lookup table that compares the existing Cielo 2035 plan side by side with the One Seattle plan to show where policies were revised in terms of the language, moved, deleted, added. All of those things are in play in this update. So the council and the public have that now. Personally, what I've been saying throughout the process is this is a pretty major update, and it really should be read as a new document. It is legislatively, when this gets adopted by council, it will replace the existing plan. This isn't a red line version of the plan that we're doing. We're replacing the existing document, but we do have this new tool. So please take a look at it if it's something that might be helpful. From here, looking forward in the process, we talked about the appendices, and we talked about what's a placeholder in the plan right now for the sub-area plans for our regional centers. There are eventually there will be 9 sub-area plans adopted into the comp plan for each of the 7 regional centers and the 2 manufacturing industrial centers. Right now, there's just a placeholder for what will be amended into the plan in the next several years. So that's the plan document. Covered that. That has been transmitted to council. Just in terms of changes, so I want to talk about the status of the document itself between January and now. We're going to look at the maps in a couple of slides here, but just know that the document itself is slightly revised. There are a handful of technical changes that we made to the document that were brought to our attention between January and when the final legislation was transmitted. There are some new, most important to be aware of is if you're following the transportation piece, the financial data in the transportation appendix in January was wrong. It was the numbers are entirely different now. There was a technical error in translating some of the financials that came out of a transportation levy approval to the appendix. So the data is correct there now. It fully incorporates the resources available through the levy. And then the second thing is a more clear acknowledgement of our growth targets under the CDPs. So now let's talk about the growth strategy, and here's where I'll slow down in a second and linger on some of the map changes. But this slide just for council and to remind everybody who we had a much more detailed briefing for both the planning commission certainly and for council back in January. But this slide summarizes the high points of our new growth strategy for the next 20 years. It's based on a vision of an affordable, inclusive, and equitable city. This is, I think, the most significant change to the city's growth strategy since the initial GMA comp plan was adopted in the early 1990s, the urban village strategy. It does retain the urban villages, essentially. They're renamed as urban centers. But this is adding to our center's geography in a much more significant way than we've ever done before by expanding existing urban centers that were undersized, by adding a new urban center around light rail, by adding a brand new place type called neighborhood centers in neighborhoods across the city, by planning for middle housing in all neighborhoods, and for envisioning higher densities around a fuller, more complete range of transit investments in the city, not just light rail, not just major nodes, but all of the frequent transit corridors are appropriate places for essentially densities that are above and beyond middle housing. Therefore, stacked flats of various heights, 4 or 5 stories in many cases, and above in other places. And overall, this growth strategy, when implemented through the proposed zoning that was reviewed by the public last fall, roughly doubles the housing capacity in the city to meet our needs to about 330,000 pension units. So here's the map. We've seen this map before. The boundary changes we will talk about in a moment are on this map. You can't see them. They don't jump off the map because the boundary changes were very small in the grand scheme of things. I don't have an exact number of acres or percent change, but I would characterize it as a relatively minor reduction in the size of our expansions and in our new neighborhood centers in several locations, and we'll cover that in a second. So we talked about some of the elements of the growth strategy. I'm not going to recap that for you because I know the commission is very familiar with this, but I do want to just acknowledge, and focusing on the neighborhood centers, the strategy does retain all 30 of the neighborhood centers that were proposed in the mayor's final plan in January. And not just for neighborhood centers, but also for 1 regional center and for 5 urban center expansion areas and 9 of the neighborhood centers. We did do some additional work informed by public comment, informed by some additional analysis to that number of places on the original map that was released in January. So these are changes between January and now, what's at City Council. You can see those places highlighted on the map here. These are the actual proposed new boundaries you see here. I do have available, if we want to have any questions about any of the individual changes, I do have some maps that show the initially proposed versus now final recommended boundaries. We could look at those if so desired, but I do want to make sure you understood the process. There were a lot of questions about process from council. As I alluded to, public comment played a big part in making some final tweaks to the boundaries. We got thousands of comments during the fall. That public comment period didn't end until well into December, so we really didn't have time to read, much less analyze and make sense of and do follow-up work on any of that public comment between the December 20th, when comment period closed, and then releasing the mayor's final plan with the growth strategy map at the beginning of January. So we did, however, continue to do that work after releasing the mayor's plan. There were some comments that pointed to in the highlighted facts on the ground that were present in some of the centers, some of the expansion areas that we may want to revisit. And we did. We took those comments into account. They included things like environmental factors, mainly slopes, historic, major concentrations of historic resources we can talk about those if you want, infrastructure constraints, very, very narrow roadways or underground infrastructure that was a barrier to development, and access to transit and amenities. Basically, the quality and level of service of the transit, the distance to get to the transit, and the distance to get to commercial districts, goods and services locally. We didn't just respond to look at the centers where people had made comments. We were very aware we were getting a lot of comments from just a handful of residents in a handful of centers. And we very intentionally took a very equitable, criteria-based approach to this. And so if we heard from one center that there were slopes that they wanted taken out of the boundary of the proposal, we then looked at all of the neighborhood centers to see, or other expansion areas, to see if similar factors were in play in other locations, so that the loudest voices essentially weren't steering the process, although they did inform the process. So that's what we did on all of the factors I just mentioned, did a full city scan. And what we came up with was the map that you see here. These are the places where any of the factors that I just described were evident. I don't, again, I'd hoped to, before this meeting, do a little bit of analysis to tell you the exact number of acres taken out, but it averaged between 1 and 2 or 3 or 4 blocks per location. The urban center expansion areas, because those are larger areas, had more taken out. The neighborhood centers, it really was 1, 2, or 3 blocks, which on a base of a dozen or so blocks in most neighborhood centers was not a big reduction, but we thought it was justified because it was consistent with our original definition of neighborhood centers and how we would draw the boundaries. This was just taking in new information and making some adjustments. We didn't get it right the first time, and we've adjusted it now. Overall, we haven't run the new capacity numbers on, but I would not expect that this change would translate into very many units in total housing capacity are removed from the proposal, in that most of the reductions were at the edges of the neighborhood centers or the urban center expansion areas, and as such, they were proposed to be zoned at a lower density than toward the core, like low-rise 1 at the edge versus a low-rise 3 in the middle. So most of the areas taken out were not proposed to be terribly dense compared to other places within the proposal. So the overall impact on capacity is also quite small. I will stop there on the centers adjustments. I know there may be some interest and core questions about that. I'm happy to drill down on that. Or if you would like, I could just do another couple of slides on process. What kind of flow would you prefer at this point?
Let's maybe pause for questions. It's
Great.
a lot of content, so maybe we
Totally,
pause.
I'm doing a flyover of a lot here,
Yeah.
but I want to stop talking and let you guys do your thing.
All right, go ahead and add your name to the queue if you have any questions. I'll kick us off with a really quick question. So this slide says boundary changes, but when we dug a little deeper, you were saying taken out. So is most of the changes with reductions or taking out of things, nothing that was added or
They're all reductions
All
with one exception. Whittier is a change with an overall net expansion in terms of total area.
Okay. And if you have the links to any of those maps.
So all of the maps are available on our website. If you just go to the landing
Vanessa will
page.
drop it in. She just
I can do it right now.
Yeah.
Thank you, Ben. Thank you, Steph. All right, Zia.
Could you describe what what constituted historic resources in there?
Yeah. Yeah. There really was only one example, and when Brennan gets here, it might even turn to him and Brennan Staley, who will be talking about the permanent legislation. He actually has been leading up the some of the more granular work around the mapping and the growth strategy. So I'm 99% sure that the only place where that came into play was the Montlake proposal, wherein that was unique among the neighborhood center proposals, was entirely, it's, smack dab in the middle of the National Historic District there, and covered not the entirety of the district, but most of it within the neighborhood center. So it had the biggest overlap with historic district properties. So in that case, we actually added some land to the Montlake. It was moved over to the west a little bit. We added some as a net decrease, but we had more specific comments from community members about that to help guide that process.
Nick, you were next in queue.
Oh, there we go. Uh, Michael, first, I just have to congratulate you, I guess, on your perseverance. This has probably been a longer process than you had anticipated, and yeah, just keeping the endurance and moving this process forward, I'm sure has been challenging for you. So thank you for that, and just your dedication there. Hopefully, you get a nice vacation planned after this.
Hopefully.
Paid for by the city, I hope too. That would be awesome.
Yeah.
But I had a question. You had mentioned, you were doing some of the analysis when you started to refine the boundaries around the neighborhood centers, and you had spoken to the capacity issue is maybe less of a concern, that these are already areas that, towards the edges that were lower rise development anyhow. But I'm curious if you had also applied the lens of 1220, trying to understand, these are the areas that perhaps we're going to be able to get a bit more of our affordability goals met through. If that has any concern for you with these types of modifications, or what type of analysis, I guess, went into making sure that we're still in a good position to deliver the affordable housing that we're needing to deliver through this update as well.
Yeah, that's a great question. So high level, what I would say is our responsibility as a local jurisdiction to plan for our land uses in a way that can accommodate types of housing that can be affordable. Per the analysis, we have that analysis in our appendix of the plan. Is one of the main reasons why we took on any of these adjustments with a very judicious, criteria-driven approach. Why this is a really minor change in the grand scheme of things. We didn't run new numbers because the changes are so small, and because, as our appendix already documents, even under existing zoning, we essentially passed the 1220 test for enough density theoretically to accommodate affordable housing types. As I think we've made it really pretty clear in talking about this plan here and elsewhere, we don't think that's enough. We think that state has set the bar pretty low. But no, not concerned about 1220, about not meeting the state test under 1220. The last thing I'll say is because some of the areas in the 1220 analysis, and again, this is highlighted as well in the appendix, the zones that are going to get us the most affordable housing are the essentially the 4 and 5 story and up, the apartment scale zoning, and in cases where we took out low rise 1, for example, it's more of a townhouse zone. So there's a case where I'm less concerned than if we're taking 5, 6, 7 story zoning out. We did take some areas that we have proposed for at that scale as well, but very small given the overall amount of new 5 story and above zoning that we have proposed, not only in the centers, but in the transit corridors and other places across the full map. So it is a factor, but I'm not concerned about. I think we're still doing a really good job of going above and beyond what the state requires.
Great, Matt Malloy.
Great. I know, and this was a good explanation, that you took the public comment for certain neighborhood centers and applied, those concerns to other neighborhood centers. I'm noticing that District 2 has no changes. Is that a product of the fact that it's mostly urban centers rather than neighborhood centers? Was it just kind of a coincidence? Does it have to do with the amount of the changes in representation, given that they have an appointed council person? Can you just speak to why, or if you've noticed that District 2 doesn't have any changes?
Well, first and foremost, I think the biggest reason why there are fewer changes in District 2 is because District 2 in the existing comp plan has a high concentration of urban villages along, mainly along the light rail corridor through Southeast Seattle. There are fewer propose new neighborhood centers. There's less land is proposed as expansion areas around existing centers, so there's more to the proposal in other districts. So we found more places where boundary adjustments were warranted. No, we scanned where there were neighborhood centers, and there's several that are in Southeast and the expansion areas like at Graham, for example. We looked at all those areas that same factors just weren't present there. Cool. Thank you. Yeah.
All right, next we have Lauren.
Yeah, Michael Brennan, it's good to see you. Kind of balance point to Matt's question, like this is my last commission meeting, Brennan, Jamie and I. So I'm feeling a little retrospective here. And thank you for the crosswalk tables. Those are helpful to see. And I just kind of want to point out, like, they're nuanced changes, but they are kind of revolutionary changes in the time that Jamie and I have been on the commission. You know, for example, a policy in 2035 or Seattle 2035 that said, provide opportunities for marginalized populations to live and work in urban centers and urban villages, has become encourage and plan for a variety of housing types in all neighborhoods and provide opportunities for a diverse population to live throughout the city. And when I started on the commission, you know, our growth strategy, you know, I thought it was so great. It's like, yeah, let's put people by transit. But with single family zoning, we're putting 70% of the growth and 30% of the land area. And that's inherently inequitable and mostly along high emission corridors and busy streets. And so, you know, I think Southeast Seattle is an example of that. You know, our light rail runs along MLK, and so much of the zoning was expanded in Southeast. And so it's good to see places like Magnolia, places like Admiral, places like Queen Anne getting some of this density. You know, there are neighborhood centers that I would have liked to see that have fallen off the map, particularly one in D2 that, you know, a very important person lives near. And so it's really exciting to see this work, and also to see, I just remember when we were first looking at the urban villages, when, you know, I was kind of new on the commission, the Greenwood Urban Village is like the shape of a cross, and it has no correlation to a walk shed or to the connected street network that is there. And so just kind of reflecting like how far we've come in 10 years, and both of your perseverance, and frankly, to have leadership at the state level, you know, middle housing being a common word now. And just that we have this greater kind of gradation and variability from urban centers, urban villages, regional center, all the way down to neighborhood center, or, you know, what we started calling urban hamlets. And, you know, it's really wonderful. So thanks for your work.
Yeah, I agree with that, Lauren. Having seen the arc. All right. Well, I mean, thank you for the positive outlet, Lauren, because I'm gonna take this back. And I kind of feel like it's not fair. You're here as part of your job presenting to us and putting forward the mayor's proposal. And so I offer these comments knowing that you may not be the right audience for them. But I would just point out that if you look at the location of where these reduced neighborhood center zones are, some of these are in areas where you don't have a lot of other multifamily housing. You don't have urban villages. And if we're truly going to buy into this vision that everybody should have a choice to live in any neighborhood in Seattle of their choice, and that there's abundant housing options there for everybody, neighborhood centers is a place to start. And it's disappointing to me that we as a city, through this comprehensive plan, while it still is a dramatic change from where we've been in the past, is still largely upholding our patterns of single family zoning under with some middle housing allowed within there. And so when the neighborhood centers were originally conceptualized, there was a lot more than 30. And good on the mayor for keeping those 30 in there in this most recent version. But I am disappointed that the frame is or that the result is that we have further reduced the area of the neighborhood centers, that there was no movement here of showing how you were actually expanding those boundaries, or trying to make up for the net loss of the reductions. And I know you called it nominal, but from a values perspective, a block is an important signal to those of us who are trying to open up the city to more people, that we're still trying to push ourselves in that direction. And so one way that could be mitigated is by adding new neighborhood centers into this proposal. I know it's really late in the game for that. But that kind of bumps me out. I was wondering, this seems to be in response to criticism of folks wanting the boundaries to shrink, not wanting certain areas to be within the boundaries. And I'm wondering if you did a tally or a count of how that weighs against comments that you got for adding new neighborhood centers or expanding the boundaries. In the grand scheme of things, are we being responsive to what most folks in the engagement process asked for?
So I think probably we'll both take a cut at answering that, because we did, and I probably should have pointed this out during going through the slides, is there is some new material online. One of the things that's new online is a report out from the fall engagement. So, and it touches on exactly, among many things we heard about, the fact, first of all, the fact that we heard both from people who looked at the proposal released in the fall and said, great, do more. More neighborhood centers or larger neighborhood centers or denser neighborhood centers or other areas like the expansion areas that we're proposing for the transit corridor. We heard about it all. We heard a lot of folks asking for that. We also, as you know, I made it clear, and I think we were just talking about a lot of folks coming forward and saying, this is too dense, it's the wrong place, it's the wrong, yeah, we want something smaller, a little less expansive. So we did hear both. We did consider both. We didn't do, there's not an apples to apples way of tallying up. It's not a voting exercise. I would say we heard a very healthy amount of comments on going in both directions that I broadly just described. We had received a lot of comments during spring of 2024 when the draft plan was out there. I think we heard more of the do more than the wait, don't do quite so much. You know, that we heard a little bit more of that in the spring versus the fall. In the fall, I would say generally we heard numerically more of the concern and the opposition to things like the neighborhood centers than what is a healthy amount of both on each side. And it was, I hope I described this accurately, and I'll say it again, which is just getting a comment from people who said, I don't like this, was not sufficient to lead us to change any of the boundaries. This was about factors on the ground that were problematic from would development even occur? Is it suitable? Would it have impacts on something like a stream corridor or other environmental issue locally? Would it, did we just not get it right the first time in terms of, well, did we have all the information about the quality of the transit service? I'll give you an example. One of the rapid ride stops that we counted for the full walkshed and for density only provided service in one direction versus all the others that were bi-directional. We just didn't quite capture that data in the first round. So I totally understand your general point and what the result is and the bigger picture, and I thank you for that. And it's certainly something we thought deeply about, but we tried to have a very fact-based approach to support any boundary changes.
And for those who are looking to continue to stay engaged in this process, what kind of fact-based comments could somebody provide that would warrant an expansion of the?
I would say you have it doesn't have, well, on the one hand, I think you articulated a policy rationale for for identifying additional places for housing supply and for greater densities. That is a relevant comment in the context of the council considering this plan. And I would encourage the commission to provide that comment to council. We have heard a variety of reactions from the councils. We brought this to them. I have no idea what eventually they'll be looking at specifically, but I think that it would be very germane to talk about the policy reasons.
Yeah.
In terms of facts on the ground, one of the things that we looked at in the original delineation and is opportunity sites for growth and for new housing. If there are locations that you're aware of, that there are existing uses or parcels of land or amenities that having housing around them would be suitable in the same consistent with the vision that's articulated in the plan, then that would be a fact on the ground that I think could be helpful, and maybe we missed some of those, but do you have anything yet? Yeah.
No.
Yeah.
And I'm the only person who will probably thank you for this, but thank you for the changes to put more clearly articulate your growth needs, so your growth targets. Housing needs, and we can. Okay, I want to make sure that we get through the rest of Michael's presentation.
Oh, I'm pretty much done too.
Okay.
But let me talk about process super quick, because I know I was starting to talk about the process there for a moment.
And then I know I have Celia and
Rose.
Rose. I have you.
Yeah, I'll wrap up and then I'm happy to answer any other questions. Then we could pivot to Brennan. So I realize you all may be aware of this, but for council, for the public, we want to be really clear about what is, especially in terms of the growth strategy, what the council will be deciding in taking action on the comp plan legislation this summer into early fall versus what is coming through separate legislation later. Both future land use map, which has the growth strategy, shows the growth strategy, includes the locations and the boundaries of all of our place types. So it includes expanded centers, new neighborhood centers, the zoning for those areas, for any of them, including zoning within the urban neighborhood, the remainder of the city and along the transit corridors. There was a proposal for that zoning was released in the fall. Final legislation proposed by the mayor will not be transmitted to council until later this year after the budget deliberations, and out of action very, very likely because of that in early 2026. So haven't transmitted legislation. There are no revised zoning maps yet. We are still looking at public comment and finalizing that legislation with council. But right now, focusing on locations and boundaries is the action that the council will be taking. And then about the comp plan legislation itself, in terms of next steps, just for this is probably more of a technical point but just for your awareness, the legislation for the comp plan changes, not just adopts the new plan, but also makes some changes to code. The lion's share of that is nomenclature. It's essentially getting an existing code that refers to urban villages, changing that to urban centers. But it's worth scanning over that legislation just to be aware of what is being changed in the code to align the code with the plan. And then the next steps are the permanent HB 1110 legislation, which Brennan is about to talk about. That is being considered in parallel to the comp plan. Technically, the comp plan will be acted on first, but it is very much a unified process. The meetings, the public hearings will be public hearings for both pieces of legislation at the same time. And action on both of those is scheduled for September. I do have dates I'm not going to go through all of the dates, but key milestones for this. Like there's a calendar on the council and the select committee website, but there's a public hearing on the 23rd. Again, that's for both pieces of legislation, the public hearing on the 23rd, that's at 9:30 in the morning. There actually might be an afternoon session. You know, Brennan? There might be, check their calendar.
3
o'clock. 3 o'clock? Okay, so I guess the one in the morning would be the remote one, the one at 3 o'clock is the in-person one. The council member amendments will be published on the 1st of August.
But there'll probably be ones that keep coming up from very last minute.
There are, yeah, you're right. The ones that they have been able to, it's a very tight timeline for council. So I do recognize that. I think I'll mean there'll be more toward the end, but there will be a tranche of amendments discussed at their August 4th meeting. I'm skipping over some meetings here. This is not the full schedule. There is just recently determined a next public hearing on September 12th, again, for both pieces of legislation as well. And that's hearing on the amendments as well on September 12th. And then 3 meetings, all in the cluster in 1 week on the 17th, 18th, and 19th of September, where action will be taken on the amendments of each piece of legislation and final committee vote. Full council probably won't be acting until September 30th at the earliest. That's the schedule.
Let's go to Cecilia and Rose.
Yeah, this is Cecilia. I wanted to echo Michaela's frustrations. And I'm not sure all the factors that go into adjustments for slope, but just wanted to give a little bit of a perspective in terms of accessibility. And again, like part of my frustration with the existing neighborhood villages is that businesses, that neighborhood villages concentrate businesses in just the center, and that makes a lot of assumptions that people can walk the 5 minutes, where the more density we have throughout neighborhoods, the more accessible they are for everyone. So I understand that when we're cutting back some of these neighborhood centers, that might not impact the commercial corridor, but in my experience living in Roosevelt, I used to live up the hill on 58th, which was I think it's an 8% grade. It was inconvenient to get to the commercial corridor. I moved, but right after I moved, that hill became so much more accessible because development and commercial businesses and retail and an eye doctor moved up onto 58th. And so I feel like rather than assuming that these areas, Seattle has a ton of slopes and steep hills, and assuming that they just can't be accessible for people, like actually adding density into those hills make them much more accessible, because people aren't having to go as far to access things that they need. And so I know, like, I don't know what the factors are for slope, but I know a lot of the arguments that people were making during public comment had to do with accessibility. And I just think that can be the wrong approach if you're trying to change where we grow and add density based on slope.
Thank you for that, Cecilia.
Yeah, and I'll expand on that as well as amplify. So I really appreciate the crosswalk table. So thank you so much. I wish it had been available sooner. I especially appreciate that it highlights changes like more Indigenous forward perspectives in language. I really liked how it helped me see that more clearly. I wonder about implementation though, like how we go from policy language to actual fact. And I also want to echo disappointment that when the boundaries were being adjusted, it would have been nice to say, okay, if you're going to shrink, how about we expand elsewhere to keep the overall size the same at least, or expand it? And working in the critical areas well myself, like I have frustration with lumping geologic hazard areas in with other more irreplaceable critical areas like wetlands and streams. Like they're different types of critical areas. You treat them differently, you mitigate them differently. And by and large, what I hear from my peers in the engineering realm is that a lot of geologic hazards can be mitigated for and could be buildable. So it's frustrating to me to just blanketly say, this is going to exclude the buildable area. So anyway, I would put that forward that if there are changes that could be made, that is one that I would like to amplify. And then I can't remember, I feel like in one of the previous presentations when we had expressed disappointment early on, there had maybe been a comment made about the possibility of adding more neighborhood centers over time. And so I just wanted to check, is that still being thought of as a possibility? Like, is there going to be a way to add neighborhood centers or other such areas in a not super cumbersome manner between now and the next major update?
I think the short answer is that's within the purview of what, future current or future mayor or council could do. There's an annual amendment process. A neighborhood center is a relatively, in a citywide scale, it's a relatively small area. And our EIS for this comp plan did cover a larger number of neighborhood centers. So we've done SEPA work to look at some of the impacts of that. So that said, in the spirit of thinking about implementation, I think the city has a lot of work to do to implement the plan, not just with zoning, but also to think about how we plan with community for the areas where we're envisioning growth, existing ones and new ones, and that's going to be a big job as well over the next several years.
Great. Any other final questions, comments?
Somehow I saw myself outside.
Some reason now all of my messages are showing up compared to other people's screens, so I'm just popping over, double checking. Okay.
I want to say I'm sorry, I thought of one more important thing just for the commission to keep in mind going forward. You're probably aware that this was another year of housing in Olympia. Which for us in doing a comp plan is a challenge when the legislature is always rewriting the rules and expectations as we're trying to plan. It happened with House Bill 1110, it happened with some other things. That's fine. I'm not really complaining as much as it sounds like. But what the point is, House Bill 1491, and as you know, is the TOD bill. It's not, our compliance is not due till 2029. But somewhere between now and 2029, we'll be looking at changes the city may need to make to comply with that, which has land use implications. Some of those may involve needed comp plan amendments. So we're all learning what that bill means and what a path forward could be on that, but that's probably the one that will have the biggest impact in this work the city will be doing.
I will say that I did a count of the number of housing related bills that the legislature passed between 2021 and 2024. So excluding this session, and it was over
40,
over 40.
Major one.
That I mean, I know you're not complaining, but the amount of regulatory fatigue and the amount of pivoting and constant adjustments that we all needed to do during this time is substantial.
Well, and as planning, this is something I'm sure you think about sometimes as well, is one of the biggest challenges for us is communicating to the public and to leadership as that landscape changes, as what's required, how the thinking is changing, what the options are for the city, and where it falls in time. Like we do make one change this year, but maybe 2 years from now, it's a different change. Maybe it overlaps and just layers on to changes that we're making to land use and to other things. It's a real challenge. So anything that commission can do to help on that communication side, I know you guys do a really great job of, helping partnering with us on that. It's tough.
Drop a link to the source where I found that information on Congress's website. Thank you, Caleb. All right, Nick, and then we need to move on to Brennan.
And I'm only asking this question because Michael, you had mentioned the TOD bill. I'm curious, also the parking bill. I think it was Senate Bill 5184, and whether you're thinking about potentially incorporating some of those parking amendments as it relates to residential development with middle housing, because middle housing, of course, set one standard. City went with, City of Seattle's proposing their standard, and then 5184, I think, is setting an even lower standard than what 1110 had. So I'm curious, I guess, implementation timing on that, if that's going to be a not with middle housing change, but rather with the deadline that's provided by the state, which I think is November 2026, maybe.
It's early 2027.
Early
I think
2027. Okay.
Yeah. I'll start now, and maybe it's a good point to pass the baton to Brennan here, because he's been working on that bill. The big picture is that the good thing is for ease of compliance, if for nothing else, is the proposal to go from one space per one unit to one space per 2 units, which was in our original proposal, still the proposal in the permanent legislation, aligns with the main feature of the new House bill. There is a lot more in the House bill on parking, which we did not incorporate into the permanent legislation. I think just keeping it simple there. We are digging into the bill itself to get some clarity on what all of its different provisions mean. There's still some question marks, and the city will very likely take some time to fully adopt that within the time, the little while the legislature's given us to early 2027. Brandon, you have anything to add to that?
No, so we're still waiting. Congress also has to give some guidance about what that really means, or some lack of clarity on things. So probably in 2026 that we'll pass something.
Okay.
It's very early in 27 is the deadline. I don't remember, know the exact month. It's like February or something.
Okay, gotcha. And are you on track for co-living? Is that, because that's ended this year? House Bill 1998. Was that something you're addressing?
We already implemented a piece of legislation to address the co-living changes that are now in effect.
Yeah.
Okay. Cool. Couldn't remember that. Thanks.
Thanks, Nick. With that, we'll pass to you, Brennan.
Great. So maybe just quickly, as everybody probably knows, that the interim legislation was passed, and it's going to be effective on June 30th. So 4 units unallowed will soon be the law of the land, and it led a lot of things that are going to be in the permanent legislation. But we did transmit that permanent legislation. It's basically intended to be a complete overhaul of neighborhood residential zoning. We're crossing out the whole chapter and starting from scratch, and also changes to comply with state law and a couple other small things. That we already briefed council for the first time, and again, it has the same track as the comp plan adoption. Probably Michael already mentioned this, but again, now that we've passed it on to the council, there are things we can't make any changes. So we're very happy to hear what you'd like to see differently, but I will not be able to make any of those changes here after this point. I guess obviously the changes are many. The difference from the interim is that one, instead of just allowing 4 or 6 units on a lot, it actually has a density limit, which allows proportionally more units on larger lots, but not on smaller lots. And then there's a wide variety of small changes that are in there, things like an amenity area standard and new design standards and things of that nature. I think we've talked about the overall approach many times, and so I would just to check in briefly to make sure we're using time. Would it be helpful for me just to give a little bit of like a high level review of just what's happening in neighborhood residential zones, like a 10 or 15 minute presentation, or do you want a more full presentation? Or
I don't know if I'm looking at you. Anybody on the call have an opinion?
I mean, it would be helpful for me to hear like what's changing in neighborhood residential zones.
Great.
Specifically.
Great, well, I'll share my screen. This is I'm going to be using the presentation that we gave to council, but I'm going to skip some of the background and why are we doing this and move right to the changes to neighborhood residential zones. And so I'm going to talk about them kind of one by one, and I will try and for each of them say what the proposal is, how it's different in the interim, and why. So the first, of course, is the number of units allowed on a lot, which is regulated by density and then lot size. So under the permanent legislation, we are proposing that the number of units allowed on a lot would be equal to 1 unit per 1,250 square feet. So again, but always meeting the state law that it's at least 4 units or 6 units if located within a quarter mile of major transit or within or to a affordable. And again, the interim only has that kind of 2 or 6. It doesn't have that density limit. So this means now on larger lots, you can have proportionally more units. You could probably get there today you could get there, could have gotten there otherwise by subdividing. This is important because it allows people to develop larger lots with more units. We don't want people purposely subdividing to try and get more units. Accessory dwelling units, again, count towards the density limits. You can already do 4. So this is really preventing people from doing, 4 principals and 2 accessory and then condoizing it rather than much else. Density on lots with environmentally critical areas are reduced in proportion to the amount of lot that has ECAs. So if like half of your lot is ECAs, then instead of getting 4 units, you can get 2. And that is very much consistent with kind of how the state framework, it very clearly says you can't exempt lots with ECAs, but you also don't have to allow the same amount of development on them. Another thing that's different is that we are proposing or different than our original proposal, is that we are proposing to retain an minimum lot size of 5,000 square feet. That's because the state has clarified their rules to say any lot that you subdivide gets 4 or 6 units. And so we want to avoid a situation in which people are purposely subdividing to very small lots in order to get more units. So that's the number of units on the lot. The floor area ratio, which I think everybody here probably already knows, again, is we multiply the lot size by the FAR. That's the amount of floor area that's allowed on a lot. Like existed previously and with the interim, it varies by density. You get more units. You get more FAR if you have more units. On a 5,000 square foot lot, it would result, for example, you have 1 home, 0.6 FAR, 2 homes, 0.8, then all the way up to 1.2 FAR. If you think about this on like an average 5,000 square foot lot, that means you could have, 1 6,000 square foot home, or 2 2,000 square feet home, or 4 1,500 square feet homes. And this again was really set with the idea that we really wanted to be encouraging 3, 2, either large 2 bedrooms or mostly 3 bedroom units.
Brandon, I don't think you did the math quite right.
Yeah,
Here,
I wondered
for those
about
that
that
are
one.
following along. I don't think we're getting a 6,000 square foot home anywhere.
I said 1 3,000 square foot home, is what to say.
Oh, that's
1
great.
3,000, 2 2,000, 4 1,500. Thank you. So height, the same as in the interim, going from 30 to 32 feet. We'll go into specifics of that. Setbacks and lot coverage. Our proposal is the same proposal we put forward in the interim. Obviously, council amended to that. But a front setback of 10 feet, rear setback of 10 feet for principal structures. Continue to have that 5-foot setback for ADUs, 0 if there's an alley. Side setback would remain at 5 feet and a maximum lot coverage of 50%. And again, just to point out, we did a lot of modeling, looking at a wide variety of housing types on a wide variety of lots. And we think this kind of strikes that right balance of having the flexibility for allowing middle housing in a wide variety of situations, while also ensuring that we have some kind of ground floor open space in the proposal. And just kind of pointing out that there is a lot of questions about whether those setbacks should be larger, and we don't think so, really, because there are so many different circumstances that we want to support, people preserving existing homes and then be able to try to site them on that smaller remaining portion. Figuring out how to get parking on a site, because we don't allow just in the front yard. Often that means bringing it to the middle of the site, and you need to kind of push things out to make that happen. There are a lot of cases in which you want that ground floor amenity to be in the middle of the site. There's like, parking off the alley, or if people just want more light access between homes. And so we think this is kind of a good compromise proposal. Amenity area is a new thing in neighborhood residential zones, but it has been in place in low-rise zones for a long time. It's again outdoor space set aside for resident use, including lawns, landscaping, patios, or roof decks. Our proposal is that would be 20% of the lot. There is no, in the interim legislation does not have any amenity area requirement. It's one of the new kind of more subtle things that we're including the permanent. It would have some minimum size requirements, and at least half of it would have to be at the ground level, although you could do some on roof decks, but those roof decks would only half the space of the roof decks would count towards an amenity area. So you have to do more in order to meet the standard. On the right, you can see some examples that were also in kind of the initial proposal about how people would achieve this. On the right, that's a one that is, I think, an amenity area of like 21%. So you can see how when you use the floor area and you try and put parking in the middle, there's very little room for maneuvering left over. So I think it's something that can be met on every property, but it's going to require some finesse on certain ones. I don't know if we need to go too much into tree regulations because we've spent a lot of time on that. Also, for council, we summarize the existing rules, the tree protection requirements, and happy to talk about them. We do have a new planting requirement for trees. Really, the idea is that the current one is based on the size of the tree when you plant it, and the new one is based on the potential canopy cover of that tree. So we want something that's not so much focused on how big is it when it's first built, but how big could it get. And we did, again, a lot of modeling here to make sure that we are doing something that was achievable, that worked with the site, and also could help us achieve our overall canopy cover goals. So additional development standard flexibility, you can now remove, reduce, or waive parking if it would help to preserve a type 2 or 3 tree. Again, we have some requirements for location of parking, which are fairly similar to what we have today. Generally access has to be taken from an alley if it is available. Parking is very limited within the first 20 feet of the front lot line. Garages must be set back 20 feet. So in most cases, if you want to park 1-to-1, it's going to look like the top, where you have to kind of pull it into the site and have maybe some combination of garages and surface parking. But what is new is that we are proposing to allow, if you're not parking, 1-to-1, if you're only doing 1 or 2 sites, you can do that kind of right up front in order to kind of create a lot more space in the interior of the lot for open space. We are proposing design standards, which also are not in the interim. 3 of them, that entries on the front facade would have to have first there's a clear entry, and it would have to have a 3-foot by 3-foot weather protection to help kind of accentuate, as well as a good place to stay out of the rain while you're getting your keys. A minimum 20% of the front facade must be windows and doors. This is already the case in low-rise zones. And minimum 3-foot pedestrian walkways must be provided to each unit. So, pretty straightforward, and yeah. And then just a couple examples of what this kind of looks like. This is an example of what it might look like to build 4 homes on a 5,000 square foot lot. Obviously, mostly 3-story. You can see the kind of what a 10-foot setback looks like on both of those. We also expect that a lot of people will continue to retain existing homes and add units, especially on larger lots or on corner lots or lots where there's a smaller house that's kind of in the front of a property. In general, if this is possible, given the location and the size of the unit, it's often preferred because you lose a lot of money demolishing a house to start building new houses. And here's some kind of examples of what that looks like. Obviously, we continue to have the bonus for stacked flats, which was exactly as we proposed it when we talked about it last. And there's the geography, just noting that 39% of neighborhood residential zones by area are in places within a quarter mile of frequent transit, where this is allowed, and about 21% are both within those areas and on lots that are 6,000 square feet or greater. And so that's good to do it today without any lot aggregation.
And do you mind saying that one more time?
Yeah. 39% of neighborhood residential zones by area are within a quarter mile of frequent transit. And 21% are both within that area and having a lot that is currently 6,000 square feet or greater. So they could do a stacked flat today without any site aggregation.
And that's what that blue color represents?
The blue is the 39%, because it's like it's little dots and you wouldn't.
And to be clear, you can still technically build a stacked flat on other sites. It just doesn't qualify for the bonus as proposed.
That's right. And then, of course, we will continue to have the bonus for low-income housing, which is as was proposed previously. Residential small lot zones, which are technically neighborhood residential zones, just like the name, but only exist in urban villages. We're proposing to rezone those from RSL to low-rise 1. RSL is a zone today that has a similar density to low-rise 1, but a lower FAR. And with the kind of FAR change we're proposing generally, it would look a lot like low-rise 1. And the only exception to that rule is that the South Park would say the urban center is being redesignated as a neighborhood center. It's that boundary is shrinking. And so in those areas that are outside of the neighborhood center, we would rezone those to neighborhood residential.
Because the area taken out was entirely residential small lot.
That's right.
Yeah, most of it's really unique among the urban village, current urban villages. The South Park is almost all RSL.
It's like 85%.
It's a whole history to that. So that's what's.
Maybe super briefly on low rise. Again, mostly we're doing a lot of changes to comply with state law. The couple things that are kind of beyond that are, one, we are proposing to remove the density limit in low rise zones entirely. That sounds like a big change, but it's actually a very minor change. Density limits already don't really apply in low rise 2 and 3 zones. They also don't apply at all to apartments or stacked flats. And they don't apply on most quarter lots as well. So they already apply in a pretty limited number of areas. With the new state, the changes that were made to by the state legislature this year, any lot that is created through subdivision can have 4 or 6 units. And so in a zones that don't have a minimum lot size like LR, that means you could always just keep subdividing to get to whatever density you want to. So a density limit is basically moot anyway, and we don't want a circumstance in which we're actually encouraging people to subdivide into smaller and smaller lots in order to get around the density limit. We also have some minor changes to encourage stacked flats. We're removing the facade length requirement. It basically just it limits the amount of length along the side setbacks that can be within 15 feet of the property line, and it results in very weird shapes when you ever try to design a stacked flat in these areas. So that will make it much easier to build them. We're also adding a very small 0.2 FAR bonus for stacked flats in low-rise 1 and low-rise 2 zone. That's anywhere, no limitations on that. You're kind of mimicking the 0.2 FAR bonus in neighborhood residential zones. And then lastly, we are updating the amenity area requirement to minimize the number of times in which a roof deck is required. Today it's the amenity area is about 25% compared to the 20% we're proposing in neighborhood residential. It is operated as an almost de facto roof deck requirement on most lots. And roof decks can be a good amenity area, but they are very expensive. They often also you make it impossible to build, shed roofs and other things that people sometimes like. So it's a small thing, again, to reduce the costs of development. There are some other citywide changes. The parking is maybe the only one that's important, but I think you all know about that. Again, removing parking within a half-mile light rail and bus rapid transit, and reducing the parking spaces to what is now the minimum allowed by state law. one space per 2 dwelling unit in other areas. And there will be more changes that we will need to make in this area based on recent state law changes. So other changes are just to comply with state law. So I think that probably is the sum of things that's worth talking about right now.
Great, opening up the queue for any questions. Yes, dive in.
Oh, there we go. I just had a question again on the ADUs. Could you just remind me the rationale for why the permanent legislation is proposing to count ADUs towards the unit density?
Yeah. So now under state law, you're allowed to have 4 units on a lot. And so that means that basically every lot can build a principal dwelling unit and 2 accessory dwelling units, which is the max amount of accessory dwellings you can have, or even 2 principal structures and 2 ADUs on a lot. So the choice to include ADUs and density limits, it won't stop anybody from doing traditional accessory dwelling units that are actually accessory, one principal structure. The only circumstance in which it would be meaningful is if somebody tried to do, like 4 principal dwelling units and 2 accessory dwelling units, and then condoize the whole thing and sell them separately. And so that's something we want to avoid, with a situation in which people are encouraged to take that approach simply to avoid density limits. Both because it kind of makes the density limit meaningless, but also because it results in people having condos instead of fee simple ownership. And we definitely heard from the public that they much prefer that. Often those condos are very difficult to manage because you have a small group of people who have to maintain it and meet regularly and et cetera.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Yeah. Because I guess I wasn't seeing it as clear as a negative, maybe, as it was being characterized, where there could be the potential for 6 units now by right in most of those areas. Because I think the rules around ADUs are different, right, than what we would apply to middle housing, and the size restrictions and height restrictions are for detached. Aren't the height restrictions a little bit less than what you would otherwise allow for townhouse development, for example?
So for ADUs, there's no longer any requirement that they be detached or attached, and there's no difference between detached and attached units. So they're all accessory dwelling units are the same, and they have to meet the same height standard as principal units as well.
Okay, so and there's no, I guess, FAR control for ADUs. You all aren't limiting those to 1,000 square feet.
They're obviously so FAR applies to all dwelling units on a lot, including ADUs. But there's still a maximum size of accessory dwelling unit, which is 1,000 square feet plus 250 square feet of garage.
Yeah. Okay, so there is a different size limit that would apply to that housing type that wouldn't apply to a middle housing type.
That's true. Although when you get to the math of like 6 units on a lot,
yeah, you're running out of. Yeah, that makes sense, especially given the lot sizes in that are like 5,000 square feet. So yeah, I can appreciate that. Okay, thanks.
Great, thank you. Michaela. Always good for comment on parking. I don't think
You love parking.
intentionally stop. No, I think. Seattle should be leading the way on parking reform. We shouldn't be complying with the state minimum requirements. We should be not letting cities like Spokane and most recently Bremerton and Port Townsend beat us to the chase. We should get rid of our parking requirements. When you show that amenity space image, it's a really compelling way to demonstrate just how constrained these sites are. And, I personally would rather have more trees on a parcel, or more patio space, or more space to connect with my neighbors that's not in the parking area. I live on a 6-unit townhouse complex. It's extremely constrained. And I'm the only one in the unit that didn't buy a unit with a parking spot. And I have this itty bitty patio space and make space for those cars that are parked off the back. And and then there was another one where you were showing kind of what it could look like if there were 2 spots off of the front street. And if you think about that, like that's taking away an on-street parking spot to create that curb cut. Those curb cuts are creating pedestrian environments that are kind of hostile to folks who are walking, who are in a wheelchair, folks who are, moving more slowly than others, trying to walk down the street. And so I'm continue to be disappointed in the way that we have, as a city, have decided to approach our parking requirements in the new comprehensive plan. Look forward to continuing the discussion when we do more legislative changes in the future to really consider ways that we can create a public realm that works for them, particularly those folks who don't. No other questions?
Any other questions or comments?
Ruth, go ahead.
I'll just echo one of my earlier comments about the whole ECAs. Not all ECAs should be treated the same. So you were here for that comment, so I won't go in more detail, but it applies to this as well.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Any other comments, questions about these?
Can I jump in with one more?
Yes, go
This is
ahead.
like, I was curious, you didn't mention anything about MHA and middle housing. Is that something that you think might come up as council is beginning to process?
I don't think that crossed their mind, my thought ever crossed their mind. No, I'm just kidding. Yes, that will definitely be a major question at council and,
Well, we're gonna be really careful in the answer here in light of the different council members might be part of the process as well. What we know is that in the adopted work plan for the permanent legislation, it's on the list of things to look at. And there are not a lot of committee meetings. It's going to be very tight schedule, and it remains to be seen what they actually focus on in terms of amendments and discussion.
And
in
are
the
you all
interim, they had a list of things they want to talk about, and that was on that list.
Yes, it's definitely on the list among about
Gotcha.
9 other things as well, but yeah.
Okay, and then are you in a position, I guess, to help sort of a constructive discussion around that topic? I'm curious if there's already some reports or data. I understand there was at least some pro formas done on the feasibility of middle housing. I can't recall, that was a while ago. I can't recall if that also considered with a fee, if that has impact.
Yes, we have done, there's the Burke study that looked at the impact of MHA on primarily larger buildings, and then the Echo Northwest look at neighborhood residential generates information about that as well. But yes, we've given that information to council, and that is now their issue to talk through it.
Okay. Okay, great. Thank you.
Just to be clear,
No, you go ahead.
just to be clear, in the permanent legislation that has been transmitted to council, there is not an MH, there's no proposal for MHA to apply an NR. However, council has indicated through their conversations around the interim, some council members have indicated potential interest, right?
Yes.
And it was formally adopted as part of the work program for the permanent. That's what's in writing, which you can point out, yeah. So, yeah.
And in writing, I think it says study.
Oh, yeah. Word choices.
And so, that would include a study to inform kind of the exploration of it.
I wouldn't read too much into the precise wording of the bullets in the work program. I read that as a list of topic areas. Anything that would be considered by the council in terms of amending the legislation would involve some study, some analysis by central staff, some generating of options. I mean, it would go through a process that would, but it's just really just a list of topics that they want to continue talking about and considering whether it has any impact on the legislation to amend it.
My concern is that it's a really substantial policy that could have a huge impact in terms of production and yield in neighborhood residential zones and could work against the policy goals. The highest priority policy goals are stated in the comprehensive plan. So to roll it out at this late, if it gets introduced, to roll it out at this late stage with very little opportunity for the public and very little transparency or back and forth, to be able to kind of look at the proposal, look at the analysis, seek public feedback on it. Just it seems to me like not the right time to be advancing something that substantial at the last final mile of the plan. Especially when I think some of the earlier findings from work recommended that it wouldn't be, was recommending it for neighborhood residential zones at that time. So it's fine, right?
So first of all, it's Echo Northwest.
Okay.
Did economic feasibility study for the middle housing. What I would say is what that study shows is how the economic feasibility of middle housing is very cost sensitive. And I think that is important information that town council has in considering the question of an MHA fee would be an additional cost. And I think you're right. There are trade-offs there that could be significant. And but the paper itself does not explicitly address MHA, nor does it make recommendations.
Okay, thank you.
I think this goes without saying, but I just want to be sure. So any amendments that were proposed by council to the executive's proposed interim legislation to implement HB 1110 will have to be reintroduced for the permanent.
Yes.
It doesn't
Yes.
carry over.
It doesn't. Yeah.
That'll happen in September.
Well, as I mentioned, amendments will be discussed on August 4th, an initial set of amendments that are go through that prescribe the process as calendared out, but that doesn't prevent walk-on amendments later on.
Question.
Yes.
I think the next slide after parking requirement was corner stores. And I wanted to, since this has already been passed on to council for the final steps, I wanted to ask a couple questions. I noticed a change that it was, or maybe this is a change, I can't remember at what stage this got added in, but we're now not just focusing on corner lots, we're talking about lots next to an alley would also apply. Is that an additional change?
That is a change. Yeah.
Okay.
And to be clear, it's lots that are next to an alley and a street. So it's like
Still a
those
corner.
corners.
Oh, they still have,
Quote
yeah.
unquote
Yeah.
corner.
Okay. Gotcha. Is that, can you talk about why that change went into effect? Or is that something that you know about?
Yeah, I mean, we just got public comments from people, and I mean, obviously we got a wide range of them. There were some people who said we should have them everywhere, but we also got some in the middle that were like, that talked specifically about this condition, and discussing it. It seemed like a reasonable small change that was in the spirit of the initial proposal.
Does it have anything to do with like loading and unloading of goods? Is that kind of the consideration for alleyways being allowed, or is it more of like a storefront inside of an alley that is going to be like, can the storefront facade be on an alleyway?
It could. I can't imagine people would do that very often. I mean, again, first of all, I think it's important to note that like people are not likely to build corner stores. They're likely to take existing buildings and kind of and do them. And it's rare probably that buildings have their entrance off the alley, and it's very rare that a business would like be willing to start a business that you can only access from the alley. But the rationale is that for corner lots is that they're much more visible, that they are, there's multiple entryways, so it is easier for loading, etc., and parking. But also that they have fewer neighbors next to them. Compared to like a middle of the block, there's a lot more properties directly next to it.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think that kind of those lots that are next to alleys and next to streets are kind of somewhat, they're somewhere between those two conditions, and yeah, that seems like a reasonable.
Okay. And then can you just like address like maximum size, out like go down the list of bullets of like what those additional constraints are?
Yeah. The maximum size is something that is around 1,500 square feet. I don't remember the exact number off the top of my head.
So it can go like upstairs. It doesn't have to just be limited to one level.
It has to be on the ground floor.
Okay. 1,500 of ground floor.
Yeah.
Okay.
And the hours of operation are pretty broad. I think they're like 7 a.m. to 9 p.m. or something like that.
Yeah, I think
it's a lot of time.
Right, yeah.
And then the noise and order are not very prescriptive. They're more like meant to get like the nuisance uses on the edges. The location of screening of solid waste and outdoor activities is pretty normal for any business.
Can you say a little more to that? Like what is screening of solid waste?
Oh my goodness. It basically just means that you're gonna have trash and recycling cans, and there has to be a fence between them or a hedge between that and the street.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
And then are there any other limits to use? Like there are certain types of business that are gonna be allowed?
Yeah, there are, you're really testing here.
I know.
There are restaurants, retail stores, and craft and food processing works. So that is restaurant is very self-explanatory.
Yeah.
The retail is things that look like corner stores, but also could be kind of a slightly brighter things like haircuts and things of that nature. And then the food and craft is like small scale production, like furniture and jams and things of that beer, things of that nature. Cider specifically.
Yeah. Could like a physical therapist office, would that yes or no qualify as like a small business?
And you just can get every harder each time.
I'm digging right now.
My recollection is that a physical therapist is not in that kind of thing. That is more it's more like a medical office use.
Right.
Well, I can send the code links.
Yeah, like what's
Also, I'd be curious I'll be curious whether there'll be any amendment to this particular provision. There's been a lot of enthusiasm for corner stores as a concept. I know council doesn't have a lot of bandwidth or time to go too granular, but there could be some interesting, I could see the use provision be amended. It's also something that can be adjusted in future years to see how this, what demand and interest there is. It's not going to be necessarily perfect for every scenario, but it is pretty permissive of a lot of the broad range uses.
Yeah.
I'd also point out their home occupations are allowed today. And so there are like, for example, the chiropractors that already do this work. They just can't have like a big sign and things like that. So this builds on top of some of that stuff that already exists.
That's why I asked about physical therapists, because I know there's chiropractors and like homeopathic people that operate in neighborhood residential. And my last question, hopefully this is not a part of the last couple, but are these rules listed where? Are they in business code? Are they in like the zoning? Are they in a comprehensive plan? Like, and why are they in that place?
Yeah, they're in the land use code, and specifically they're in the use section. Like there's a table of allowed uses, things are allowed and prohibited and conditional, and they're in that list with standards for under what circumstances they're allowed.
And specifically in the legislation that is before council right now, you can find it in the use section under neighborhood residential.
Which will be up in September.
No, it's available now.
Okay.
It has been transmitted, it's been introduced to council, you can read it.
Okay.
There's a link to it on our website.
Okay.
I've been advocating amongst the commissioners. I think we need to rebrand corner stores if you want to future-proof the policy. Because one of the experiments that this is built on the premise that this should be allowed on corners. But I really think these should be allowed in more places within neighborhoods. Or maybe we should be calling them neighborhood stores or something else that like doesn't necessarily define and bound them to a geography that might change over time.
The code just calls them small scale commercial uses.
Oh,
okay.
That's
wonderful.
nice.
That's not very, that's like Longville. Say we could come up with another terrible name that like
ADU.
like a neighborhood hamlet store.
Middle stores.
All right, I want to make sure we get to folks. We have about 20 minutes left. A little Warren and then Dylan.
Thanks. Thanks for the question about corner stores or just the topic of corner stores. This, I kind of want to go one scale up to the neighborhood commercial zones that were designated in the new zoning. And, I'm just kind of looking at the maps and, I live in Mount Baker. I'm down the street. I'm kind of in the Mio Posto, Belvedere, zone right there at Bowen and Mount Baker Boulevard. And, when I'm just recalling back in the fall when we were reviewing the first phase of these maps, I watched some of those, beloved places, corner stores is what made me think of it, turn orange. And, those are, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but, those are taking those mostly focused on where there's existing commercial use in neighborhoods and kind of expanding it. I remember one of our comments being, we want to see more of this as opposed to an expansion of an existing site where those, uses have, been grandfathered in or kind of these unicorns within our neighborhoods that people really love. So, like, first of all, it's just I feel like an OG right now. Like, this is so exciting to see. But I just remember Grace Kim, like, early in our time on the planning commission saying, like, it's not just about limiting commercial to commercial zones. It's about allowing more uses in more parts of the city. And I just feel like this corner stores, even just this slide is just revolutionary to me. And so I'm just kind of wanting to think about, the next level up of neighborhood commercial and, what your thoughts are and like what we were able to achieve in this code update and like what you heard from people when they were looking at those orange dots in their neighborhoods, likely surrounded by the brown of low rise and mid rise, and kind of some of the tension and what you're feeling like maybe could be the conversation for expanding that again, that smaller mid granular neighborhood commercial that's not quite a corner store, but it's not like the center of an urban village. Would love a recap on what you heard. And what changed between the draft and now?
Well, so the first thing is all those changes are in the centers and corridors legislation, which will not come out until the end of this year and council will take up in 2026.
Okay.
So there's nothing that's changed
Okay.
Since that last October proposal.
Okay.
But what we did hear from people, honestly, that was not a core thing that people were talking about. So it was a small number of comments, but we definitely heard people wanting more commercial in more areas. Some small number of people and but also people who like really care about the health of their existing one and kind of want to focus things maybe we heard some of that, but much more we'd like more of it in more places. And especially a lot of people like really most often like there's nothing near my house and I would like something near my house.
Yeah.
I just want the wanting to see more places. Most of that was in this neighborhood center. We would like to see more within, let's say, not broadly spread out. Most of it was very neighborhood center focused. We need more business services in this place.
Yeah.
The vast majority of comments were about a neighborhood center. And so in that sense, it was more about concentrating it in that place where it already is allowed. But there were a lot of people who were like more on thinking about the corridors. So like, well, we're gonna have all these growth on corridors. We'd like to see more commercial uses there too.
Got it. Thank you for reminding us of the, centers versus corridors. I live in a building that has an old corner store that's been adapted into, I live in a cooperative now, and just thinking about these places and the next generation of, the 41 neighborhood centers that were studied, like all those dots on the map are right on, and so I think like as the commission continues to take up and champion this work, it's about these 15-minute communities, these places where you have something in a useful walk of your home, whether that's hopefully always a transit stop, but also a place to buy a coffee or, buy some eggs or something like that. And so this is the wedge that has been opened and that we can continue to grow. And thanks for your leadership on it all.
Dylan.
Hi, thank you. I think like other commissioners, I'm a really big fan of the corner store idea. I am trying to, I think, understand at least through the graphics of, I guess, what other types of uses might be able to occur on top of the corner store if it's kind of inherently allowing for mixed use to occur, if it's like kind of one or two residential units that are existing above, if any of that is language is kind of captured within the description of the corner store as well. Because I could see kind of maybe some mom and pop stores kind of being incentivized or being really attracted to this idea. And so I was just wondering if there's language that kind of supports this idea.
Yeah, so well, the only thing that's allowed over top of them is residential, but that is residential is allowed kind of very broadly as residential would be allowed at any site. There's not limitations, you get the same number of units, and so that's very loud. Obviously, the challenge is the once you're stacking and having commercial on the ground floor and residential above, there's even more than normal a number of challenges for building code and energy code. But again, we're not likely to see a lot of this being from scratch, and so it's probably mostly people who are like, if they have a house and they're they're already living in it, and this is going to be below it. But we might over time we might see some people having a more like a thing that looks like a townhouse on the first floor is a business. But I don't know if that answers the question for you, but great.
Yeah, awesome, thank you.
I think that was kind of my question too, is that like, how likely are we to actually see this manifest if there aren't incentives in place for, especially around new development, to have commercial on the bottom, residential on top, particularly because you're going to have to deal with a lot more building code challenges. And I'm just curious, like, I think a lot of people like it in theory, and what you all found in terms of the feasibility, whether or not we actually will see.
Yeah, kind of as I said, like, it's gonna be really hard to build this stuff from scratch. And I think that it's just a fundamental aspect of a corner store that, the revenue you can generate on a space that's on a high street is just so much more than what you can do on a outside of that. Again, we've seen a number of corner stores in existing buildings. They often sell pretty expensive stuff because they have to do that in order to make it meet. So I do think we have to be pretty like eyes open about what this really means. But I do think for me, the much more positive thing is like people who want to start small businesses. Like maybe you're a ceramicist and you just want to have like a space for showing that, or you're already a PT at home, but you want to make it like a more formal space, and maybe hire another person. And I think there's like an opportunity for kind of incrementalism and places to start small businesses when you already own property. That is really positive. Don't expect to see like a huge wave of new corner stores everywhere across the city.
Well, the other incremental, another part of what I would imagine it may very well happen is there are particular locations in the city that are adjacent to or proximate to existing either commercial nodes or other areas that are attracting a lot of people that are neighborhood residential zone. The economics might be a little bit better for those locations. It's a way to incrementally add a little bit more of a mixed use flavor, a little bit more street life above and beyond the boundaries of some of those existing centers. Could be neighborhood or urban center. I think they're pretty rare, but there might be examples where it will work, even possibly through new construction, but certainly through some of our older, larger housing stock, I could say.
I think something you think of like Wallingford, this does also apply to every arterial street that doesn't have neighborhood commercial. So you can definitely see like on those streets, have these big houses that it's easy to put maybe like a restaurant on the first floor, and
you have
they're limited in size, so it's not gonna.
You have nearby foot traffic, maybe just some unique little micro geographies where you can make it work.
Or you could have volunteer park cafe where there's not a lot of foot traffic, but it's a destination in and of itself.
Right, that's just saying not necessarily commercial, but other places where there's foot traffic and people with money to spend. Right? Speaking of capital, it's economic spending. Yeah, the market. fundamentals of it.
Any other comments, questions around this? Around the HB 1110 pieces?
I apologize for joining late, but I know the general context of what you guys are looking at. I'm just curious, you guys may have already asked this question. Do you guys get into the reductions in the neighborhood center boundaries at all? Do you
We
ever go
did,
over that?
yeah.
Cool. I'll follow up later then.
Yeah,
Cool.
but if
Great.
you have anything that would be, we talked a bit about, yes, they were called changes and we clarified were they actually a reduction? Yes, for the most part, reduction.
Adjustments.
Adjustments.
Or reductions.
It's, yeah, it was roughly about 60 lots, which is
Yeah,
in the range of like 1,000 lots. And I guess my curiosity was with that, if this continues to happen, if this, as council looks at these boundaries, how do reductions like that factor into the capacity study that's being done? And what's that balance between looking at potential reductions and then checking that back to the housing capacity that's expected to come from the comprehensive plan? And is there a back and forth sort of feedback as we start to maybe reduce some of the areas where we can increase density? Do you guys have to go back then and do some updates to the capacity study? Is that part of the conversation? Does that make sense? Going on,
Yeah, if I can give a relatively simple answer to that. We'll work backwards from the end game.
Yeah.
After the comp plan gets adopted and, council's adopted new growth strategy, new zoning, we will do a buildable lands type capacity analysis for where we've landed. We did not do a new capacity estimate for the changes. Part of that is we haven't transmitted the new revised centers and corridors legislation. We don't really have a zoning map to work with. These are just boundary changes. However, I think what we've talked about here is because most of those areas are at the edges, on balance, they tend to be the places that were zoned for a little bit less intensity than in the core of some more of the low-rise 1, low-rise 2, more in the mix there than low-rise 3. There was some low-rise 3 in the original proposal and the areas taken out. We think overall, if you consider the amount of capacity added in the full meal deal, at least in the fall, was 170,000 additional units of capacity. This is a very small portion of that overall number that has now been reduced. Should the council be thinking about that? Would we hope that the council is thinking about those trade-offs? Absolutely. We need more housing. We've been really consistent about that. And we took these out based on some very specific facts on the ground criteria, not because people said they didn't like it or asserted that we didn't need it, but rather there were things going on in particular locations, and the overall impact is very small portion and we are well above the threshold statutorily or otherwise. We're not going to bump into a state requirement by these small changes. Nonetheless, we feel like this is a good proposal the council should adopt. And it demonstrates, I hope, that we listen to community, and where there were things that were really germane and factual that we could apply equitably, that we made some small changes to reflect that. And that's part of the process, and why I hope that the council looks at this and says, okay, we'll got this. Good work.
well, I'll close this out then if there are no other questions, comments, with a final question, then really close this out. which is that we've covered a lot today. There's a lot that's going to be upcoming, several hearings, amendments. What are if you were to pick your top two things that you would love the commission to pay extra attention to, or how we can help support, what would they be?
I mean, I think we're at the stage where, this is council's show now, and we're gonna, when they ask us for information, we're gonna tell them, but we're not, we're not gonna tell them what we think about their changes or.
But we can.
But you
We
can.
can.
But also, we're not gonna tell you what you should tell them. So, I don't have wouldn't want to give guidance on how you should try and influence council.
I mean, if there's something you expect them to dig in on, it'd be helpful to.
Yeah.
Well, I know as a part of the interim, they put out a kind of a work plan for the key topics that they want to talk about, and I think those are the ones, yeah.
The only thing I would add to that is the commission does a really good job of taking the big, really working two levels here. I think you've done a very nice job of telling the story of the comp plan, looking at the big picture vision. Look at the words and the plan itself. I think you were talking about some of the language change in the crosswalk table is that's the role of the commission, is to advocate for the planning that we're doing. Look at the words in the plan, look at the details in the zoning, make the connections, keep telling that story, and you guys do a great job of it. And you did some great issue papers, and the comments are very, very detailed. I think you have a great list of things to follow up on. It is a very compressed process, though. You probably are going to want to make some choices about where to put your efforts in terms of comments. There are only a couple of opportunities.
Well, thank you both so much for spending the end of your day with us. And it's always just a pleasure to have staff come and join us and to give us the chance for direct conversation and questions and to dive deeper into all this. I know that as a commission, we're going to be tracking all of this very closely and following up on, we've got all kinds of things happening in the next several years. So you all have your hands full. Lauren and I will be watching from afar. But thank you for your time. Thank you for your service and and thank you to everyone for leaning in today and being here in person for the folks being.
Super exciting. Thanks.
And thank you, Jamie and Lauren, for all your work.
Awesome.
I mean, all you guys do, but.
Especially.
And personally, I'm not sure which is worse, coming at 7:30 in the morning when you've just woken up, or at 5:30 in the afternoon when you're feeling like it's time to go to sleep. It's all good. We're happy to be here.
Yeah.
This is a warm up to a happy hour. So.
There you go.
All right. Well, with that, we are adjourned 2 minutes early.
Great.
I got folks on the call. Thanks, everyone.